What's up, guys? Welcome back to the caves, and today we are going to be talking about another class build surrounding one of the new overclocks that we got in Season 5. Specifically, we are going back to the Gunner to talk about one of the most explosive overclocks that we have seen to date, the Mortar rounds. Now, I know I just did another Gunner build not too long ago, but I can't help the fact that his new toys are just so much fun, and the Mortar rounds specifically have been, no pun intended, a blast to use. So if you guys are ready, let's go over the living artillery build for the Gunner class in Deep Rock Galactic. By the way, if you want to see more build videos or just more videos in general, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss another video. So this build is one that is incredibly fun and effective to use, and also allows you to let out your inner demolitionist in order to slay out massive groups of enemies and soften up very strong targets very easily. The main gist and overview of this build is we are using the Thunderhead heavy autocannon along with its new Mortar rounds overclock to slay out massive groups of enemies with ease. The amount of explosive potential and area of effect that this thing has is just unreal, and it makes things like protecting escort tunnels or just destroying massive swarms a absolute cakewalk. You will literally be a one-man walking artillery barrage that can take out so many enemies with ease that your teammates might even question why they're there in the first place. That being said, you will also have a decent amount of single target capabilities because the Mortar rounds do still do a lot of damage, and also to complement it, we are taking the Bulldog heavy revolver to help with those singular or distant threats that we maybe don't want to shoot a bunch of artillery shells at. Between both of these tools, we have a good amount of crowd control and single target damage that will make this build effective on pretty much any situation you find yourself in. So then going into the actual gameplay of the build and what you're meant to do with it, essentially this build focuses, as I said earlier, on massive swarm elimination with a sub-focus on single target damage to a decent extent. The iconic overclock for this particular build, the Mortar rounds for the autocannon, basically make its projectiles incredibly powerful and have an insane explosive radius, while basically completely taking away their direct impact damage and making it fire significantly slower. This turns the autocannon into a swarm-destroying machine that is capable of just lighting up massive crowds and taking them out very quickly. Ideally, you want to have very strong choke points and funnel the enemies into them. That way you can just let out a symphony of explosives and just destroy everything in your wake. Now, the explosives also can do very good damage to single targets and soften them up, especially bigger threats where the weak point might be very difficult to hit. Since the explosives have such a wide radius, you don't necessarily need to worry about hitting weak points, especially with this weapon. But if you did need to hit precision targets, that's why we are running the Bulldog heavy revolver with its elephant rounds overclock to give it significantly more damage and accuracy at the cost of ammo and a slower rate of fire and reload speed. This gives us the ability to handle those distant or singular threats, as well as capitalize on big enemies that have weak spots that the Mortar rounds might not necessarily be the best at handling because of the lack of direct impact damage that they have. Ideally, you want to kite the enemies into a very advantageous position, as I said before, a bottleneck or choke point, where you can basically just turn them into fish in a barrel, or I guess in this case, bugs in a tunnel, and completely decimate them without too much trouble. With that said, a driller on your team to help out with this is very good because he can set up bunkers for you or just set up tunnels that he can kite the enemies into and make it very easy for you to do your job. This build thrives on mission types like escort duty, deep scans, maybe even salvage operations, but basically any situation you find yourself in, this build can do something to help alleviate the pressure from both you and your team. So now going into the actual setup of the build, first we have our perk choices. This build, perks are not super duper important and it does not revolve solely around them, so you have a little bit of leeway here, but there are still some good ones that you might want to take. For passives, the first one I am choosing is Resupplier because it's just very good. I've said this 1,000 times on the channel, but I think it is probably one of the best, if not the best passive perk in the game. The second perk option I'm running is Born Ready, and especially with this build, it shines a lot because I find myself switching weapons constantly and taking advantage of the automatic reload. The reload speed on both of these weapons is relatively low, so being able to swap back and forth and get those free reloads very quickly can be very useful. And then the last passive perk I'm running is actually Sweet Tooth to help keep us alive if we do need to, as well as give us a little bit of extra mobility whenever we do heal. For active perks, I'm running a very simple gunner setup with Dash and Field Medic to give us more mobility and to help get our teammates up in a pinch using things like our shield, but you could also run Iron Will. As I've said before, it is very good, and even something like Shield Link I think works very well with the gunner personally. Then getting into the weapons and equipment for this particular build, first we have our throwable grenade, and for this you can really use any particular grenade that you want and adjust it based on the type of mission you're using, but the lead bursters are a good comfort pick for me for pretty much any engagement, so that's what I took. Then going on to the actual weapons and their upgrades, our primary weapon is of course the Thunderhead heavy autocannon with their new Mortar rounds. To go a little bit more into detail about what the mortar rounds do, basically the projectiles that the weapon fire go from being straightforward and hit scan to having travel time as well as travel arc. The projectiles are so heavy that they have weight, so they get pulled down. However, the benefit to that is that they have a significant boost to their area of effect damage and radius. With the drawback that the rate of fire is slower, they have much less ammo, and the direct impact damage of the shot itself has basically gone away. So you're essentially trading direct damage for extremely powerful area of effect damage with this particular overclock, which is incredibly strong. The projectile arcing is a little bit difficult to get used to, and it makes the range of this weapon function a little bit differently than normal, but once you get used to it, it's actually not too bad. And again, our main purpose for this particular weapon is to just absolutely decimate groups of enemies very quickly. So to assist our purposes, in Tier 1 I chose the expanded ammo bags just to have some more reserves. You don't really need impact damage or magazine size for this. I didn't think it was really that necessary, and damage really doesn't do anything because we have 0 direct damage. In Tier 2, honestly, any option here is good and you can swap these at your leisure, but I went with the improved gas system for just a faster overall rate of fire. Third tier, I went with the loaded rounds for even more splash damage to lean into the overclock, and the same thing for tier 4, I chose shrapnel rounds for an even bigger splash radius. Then lastly, in the 5th tier, I chose the damage resistance to help us with survival, especially if enemies are close to us when firing, which happens honestly a lot when you use this. Moving over to the Bulldog, again, our main purpose for this secondary weapon is to pick off those distant targets or deal with things that have very easily attainable weak points or just singular threats that we really don't want to burn a lot of our explosive rounds on. And if nothing else, to get a proc on board ready to help us reload our autocannon much faster. And to further improve the Bulldog in the 1st tier, I chose the improved accuracy just to make it a little bit easier to hit. In the 2nd tier, I chose the expanded ammo for just more shots. In the 3rd tier, any option here is good, but I went with hollow point bullets for better weak point damage, since that's essentially what we're going to be using this for. The 4th tier, I went with ammo again, just because I didn't feel like extra damage on top of the elephant rounds was really that necessary. We're already going to be doing a crap ton of damage with the elephant rounds, so I didn't really think we needed much more. And lastly, in tier 5, I went with Deadeye for even better accuracy, since I like to move around a lot, but Neurotoxin is also a good option if you wanted to go that as well. And then briefly going over the upgrades for the rest of the gunner's equipment. The zip lines, I'm using my usual setup, which is just the increased angle in tier 1 and faster speed in tier 3. For the shield, I'm also using my normal setup, which is just the larger radius in tier 1 and then improved duration on tiers 2 and 3. And then lastly, for the armor rig, I have the standard setup that I like to use, which is improved generator in tier 1 to get our shields back, healthy in tier 2 to make us more durable, and of course, breathing room in tier 4. So giving my final thoughts on this build, while not necessarily the most practical or easiest build to necessarily explain or set up, it is certainly one that is incredibly effective and very fun to use. The mortar rounds has been one of the more fun overclocks that I've used since Season 5 has come out. And regardless of where it stands on like a tier list or effectiveness scale, it is just very fun. And as I've said several times so far, it makes just dealing with large groups of enemies a trivial task because you will just blow them to oblivion. If you really wanted to, you could experiment with different secondary weapons instead of just the Bulldog. It's just the one that I wanted to stick to because I thought it was simple, it was basic, and it helped alleviate something that the build was kind of lacking in, which was single target direct damage. But if you wanted to run something like the coil gun, that would also be very effective here, or even the burst pistol might help out as well. The main key point of this build is the autocannon with the mortar rounds, and this build, in my opinion, lets it shine incredibly well and show you the kind of damage that it's capable of. I hope you guys like this build. Next time, it will not be another gunner build, so don't worry about that. And if you guys have any specific overclocks or build videos that you want to see covered, let me know down in the comments. And also let me know what your favorite overclock from this season has been so far and why. Anyway, hope you guys found this video helpful and informative. If you did, please be sure to give it a like because it tells me what types of videos you guys want to see. And consider becoming a member today as it really helps out the channel. Rocket Stone Miners, I will see you in the next video.